Hello and welcome to Humulus U Digital Hop Symposium. Yes, Jared, that was some wild waiting room music. Music shout out and credit to Todd Haug from Three Floyds Brewery who selected that awesome tune to get us started here. I'm your host, Gretchen Stabley, and I'm new on the marketing team at BSG, and we are thrilled to be here talking with you about all the exciting things happening this hops harvest. Thanks for joining us. This is our third and arguably most anticipated discussion of our live webcast series. If you haven't already done so, register for Thursday's session where we will be giving a tour of the BSG Hops facility and our hop solutions on Thursday. Also, any of the past sessions and talks that we put out and educational sessions are always available on our YouTube channel, BSG Craft. At this point, I'd like to ask our hosts and panelists to turn on their cameras and unmute. We are very honored to have Matt Brynildson from Firestone Walker here to lead this year's Brewers Roundtable. Hello. And our brewer panelists today are Todd Haug from Three Floyds Brewery in Chicago and Brian Tonnes from Bent Paddle Brewery in Duluth, Minnesota. As we pointed out earlier, a very Minnesota heavy and Minnesota proud group of brewers and panelists. Welcome, brewers.
Thanks for having me.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah, my name's Matt. I am born and raised in Minnesota, even though I don't live there now. So that completes the trifecta. Todd, you're from Minnesota here?
Yes. Correct. Minneapolis, yeah.
And Brian wasn't born there, but he migrated there.
Yeah, I was born in Wisconsin, but migrated to Minnesota.
Smart.
Still a Packer fan, though. Can't help it.
Ooh.
Brian, that makes two of us, but here's BSG, obviously, for those who most of you know, are right here in Shakopee, Minnesota. So
Yep.
We are Minnesota proud. All right, well, I'm going to turn myself off and let you take it away, Matt.
All right. So, this is pretty easy for us. You've got three brewers here that are all very hop forward, hop loving breweries. And it's in a round table format. So we have some questions prepared just to get everything rolling, but we do invite you to ask your questions, I think through the Q&A box. I'm not super Zoom savvy, and hopefully they'll feed those questions up to us and we'll answer all of your questions. We'll be on for, about an hour, but we've got a little bit of time beyond that if things are still cooking. And I think, just to kick it off, maybe starting with you, Todd, you could just give us a little bit of your background, the breweries that you've worked for, and what you're up to these days.
Yeah, so when I was 21, about 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago, I got a job at Summit Brewing Company in St. Paul as just a bottling line guy, and ended up as a home brewer, started there, and then started brewing there about a year after that. And I've been in the industry ever since. So I worked there for about 5 years. Entertained the idea of going back into music full time. That didn't pay the bills. So I got a chance to interview at a position at a brew pub. The only brew pub really in Minnesota at the time, or Minneapolis at the time, was Rock Bottom. And Rick and Van were there, and met with Rick and thought it was a good opportunity for me to get back into what I missed about homebrewing was recipe development, and I didn't get to do that as a shift brewer at Summit. So for 10 years, I did that at Rock Bottom. And then I left Rock Bottom to start Surly Brewing, and me and Omar started that, and that went well. Worked there, left there after 10 years, and then moved to Chicago to help Nick Floyd with his most recent expansion.
Wow, that's a great resume. That's
notable
Midwest powerhouse breweries.
I don't know about
that. And then Brian, give us your background and how you got into all this.
Well, I got into it while I was going to college. I was going to University of Minnesota Duluth in Duluth, Minnesota, and needed a job, and got a job bartending at a small brewery in Superior. It was called Twin Ports Brewing Company at the time. It's now Thirsty Pagan. Brewed there for 3 to 4 years. Just kind of got into it, took over my life. Dropped out of college, and kind of took over my life. And from there, went on to brewing school, went to Siebel, ended up going through the full program, went to Germany. Got back, was applying for tons of different jobs. Took me quite a while, but finally got one with also Rock Bottom. So I worked with Van in Portland, Oregon, worked there for a bit. And then when Todd was leaving, we kind of worked out a little plan, and he left, and I took over for Todd at Rock Bottom, Minneapolis, and ran that place for about 7 years before opening up Ben Paddle about 9 years ago.
Wow.
So
Yeah. So
coming up on a decade.
what in the world was going on at Rock Bottom back then? Because there's some legends and some great breweries have kind of, taken root from that seed.
Well, fortunately, there was two guys there, Kevin Reed and Mark Youngquist, who were in charge. They started the brewing program there, and they fostered a culture for brewers to not only be good technical brewers, but also understand the business side of what's going on, have line items on the P&L, and actually be responsible for them. And that the whole idea was that they knew we would probably want to go on to do our own things or help other breweries open or start stuff. So they kind of had this little incubator. Mark ended up leaving. He runs a small brewery in Dolores, Colorado. Kevin Reed, I think, is working for AC Beverage, so he's still in the industry. Saw him last year in Portland a couple weeks ago. But yeah, it was really those guys. They protected us from
Very much so.
the upside of restaurant management. So thanks to them, we had a great background on other stuff besides just technical brewing, and that gave us a leg up on Brian opening his own brewery, or me helping Omar open his own brewery, or so.
I think one of the other things that they did is they, even though we didn't quite have the reputation for it, they did allow us brewers to be very expressive in the beers that we made.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Recipe development was a huge side of it. I'd have, at least when I was there, I'd have sometimes 23, 24 different beers coming out a year, all brand new recipes. And that helped me a lot, coming from a much smaller pub, learning the technical side of Rock Bottom, and then still being able to express myself as a brewer.
I think that changed. Yeah,
it did change, which is
when after you left,
Yep.
which kind of did ruin it. Back to Gretchen's question, that I think was the start of the end of Rock Bottom.
It was. So it pushed me out the door a little faster than I expected, but I already had the project going, so it worked out well.
Well, anyway, it was a springboard for a lot of now famous and great breweries and some real innovative brewers. So I thought that was a really interesting background, even though it's not exactly to our subject.
Right.
As long as we're on that, when you guys were back at Rock Bottom, these are the earlier years, was dry hopping and was hop selection and, as developed as it is today, and we're definitely going to get into that, how was it done back in a brew pub group like that? Were you doing hop selection and were you bringing a lot of hop forward beers?
Yeah. Luckily, Van, if you guys, if anyone on this doesn't know Van Havig, he's is also kind of a Minnesota guy. His family there, but grew up in Orange County, California, was an economics professor and dropped out of school to become a brewer, much to his parents' dismay. But he ended up working at whatever Schmidt Brewery in St. Paul, spraying down the floor for Sig Plagins. And then ended up getting a job at Rock Bottom. But he went to Reed College in Portland, so he loved the area. And he and Mark Youngquist were really the catalyst for forming that company, Rock Bottom, as a company, relationship with hop growers. And they really spearheaded the hop selection. There'd be years that no one would go but Van and maybe 3 other brewers, but we at least knew that someone was looking after what we were buying as a company. And that, I was trying to do the math. Maybe you remember, I was asking Pedro last week in Yakima, when was Scott Desseralt and Gerard still at Yakima Chief? Because that was the first year I was there. So, but for Rock Bottom, so it's almost been 25 years. So they took it serious.
Yeah, and you mentioned Gerard because I think he might have been one of the first mentors who really was preaching, and I'm talking back late 90s at this point, preaching the idea of hop, not just hop selection, but hop contracting, and how critical that is, in terms of relationship with growers, in terms of a sustainable business, and especially today when there's 8,000 plus small brewers across the country, trying to track the needs of those brewers, in terms of going back to the farm and to the merchant level. The contracts are really what dictates what's going to be, expanded upon, what's going to get pulled out, and what ultimately is going to be grown and available.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I got into it with Siegel about what we've been trying to do, and he wasn't real happy. So, which I appreciate, but I just need him to talk to our accounting department.
Anyway, that's an early plug for contracting, regardless of the size of the brewery. But let's kick it off. We have, like I said, some questions just to get rolling here, and we're just in. I think for some growers, especially Idaho, is wrapping it up. Yakima should be finishing up harvest, if not in the next week, very soon. So it's certainly the peak of selection time for brewers. And I was just in Yakima last week, and it was like, I think there were more brewers in Yakima than there were in Denver for CBC a few weeks back. I mean, it's basically everybody was there. So let's talk a little bit about selection. Every brewery does it different. And maybe each one of you, Brian, why don't you start? We can talk about I guess just what selection means in your brewery, whether you're able to travel or not, and just kind of your philosophy around it. And it doesn't have to be, deep words of wisdom. I think it's just interesting, regardless, your size of your brewery and how you're going about selecting and procuring the best hops for your brewery.
Yeah, I mean, it's being the smallest brewery on this panel, things are definitely a little bit different for us than you two guys. But selection is definitely a very important part of what we do every year. As of late, we've last year and this year we decided not to travel just based on everything going on and budgets and all that stuff. So we are doing virtual selection this year. So we have, hops coming in from all of our different suppliers that we're selecting. We're in the process of doing that. We're, probably 3/4 of the way done with that right now. In years past, we have traveled out. We've been out to Yakima a few times selecting. And, it's interesting when we were looking at opening up a brewery back 10 years ago. The first thing I did is reach out to all of our different, hop suppliers that I'd used at Rock Bottom and that I know of, and basically started working on signing contracts for things about 1.5 to 2 years before we even opened up the door, just because it was so important. And it turned out to be a really good thing with the second hop crunch that I experienced in the market. Rock Bottom definitely taught me that it was important to make sure you can get one of your most important raw materials, which is hops, especially when you're creating hop forward IPAs and various other things. And so that's kind of our process right now. We are looking forward to going out and selecting next year. We do visit a lot of farms. We meet a lot of the growers, and we're trying to build more relationships on that side. Our volume of hops that we purchase don't really allow us to have really deep relationships with any single grower, but we're working on that. And depending on what the future holds for us, we hope to kind of go down that road in the future.
You don't use any Minnesota grown hops anymore since Mighty Axe went down?
No, not since Mighty Axe went down. We used them, for a couple years on a couple small ones. We did fresh hop beer with them. It just didn't really work out. A lot of issues when it came to the logistics of things and just quality and all that stuff that kind of came down the line. And that's something you run in with some of the smaller growers, and some of them are really good, some of them aren't. And that's why you have to get to know your growers and see what their process is like, and just kind of see the way they do things. So,
yeah,
great. And then Todd, so you're working for a bigger brewery. Obviously, your contracts are probably a little more significant. Yeah. What's the selection process for you guys?
Well, it's changed a bit. It's kind of like. The deal, like you kind of get excited because maybe there's murmuring of like 2007 that things are you're gonna run out, or they're pulling acreage out. I don't know, farmers are always interesting that way, where so we kind of probably we did happen at I think it happened to everybody. I think everyone had over contracted, and now we're through that. Now we're trying to get it a little bit more balanced, which as a brewer terrifies me, because that means we're electing to not select some of the varieties because we're planning on purchasing from the spot market. and especially after what I saw last in Yakima a couple weeks ago, there were some varieties that I know are some lots are gonna end up on the spot market that I don't think we should brew with. So yeah, it's kind of a give and take between us and the business side, and it always has been.
But in an ideal year where you're going out and selecting for contracted hops, do you take a few members of the brewery out?
Yeah.
Do you have any, I don't know, I think everybody's got a little bit different way they do it, whether they're
Right.
like deep dive data collectors or they like to do it blind. And I don't know if you've got any, do you target certain growers, merchants and growers that you're very, very, year after year drawing from, or do you keep it pretty open?
Kind of like you, Matt. I think we went down the road. We're like, oh, we're going to try to work with just this one grower. And then we realized that might be kind of short-sighted based on growing areas or regions or processing, or even just like maybe a blend of one variety that is amazing. So we're back to using a lot of different suppliers again, growers, I should say. So yeah, we go out every year, with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of us. We used to send 2 different week crews out just to cover harvest, because last time we were just out, we split the Citra harvest, which was kind of problematic to see everything. But yeah, we try to do it blind. We don't want to know farms. We don't want to know. We want as little info as possible, other than some basic lab stuff on that specific lot. But and then go from there. And it's amazing. Like year after year, we almost always pick certain farms or certain. So we definitely have a type that we like, whether it's in Centennial, Cascade, or Citra. And I think every brewer, I mean, I used to go on the panel. Country Malt used to have a group of brewers that would go, and it was some pretty vocal brewer characters. And there'd be arguments, it'd be like, people were like, no way, that's crazy. That's not the Cascade I would pick. And then we had to kind of, that really drove it home that it's like, yeah, people really have a particular thing they're looking for in certain things. And the only way to do that, obviously not during a pandemic, but in normal years, is to try to get there and experience it out in Yakima, or like Brian's doing, have them send cuts to you directly and rub them at home or at the brewery with your staff.
Yeah, I mean, our experience, we did not go to Yakima last year. We did the remote selection. And what I really liked about that was the fact that more of our brewing team got to participate, people that we either, didn't in the past send out to Yakima, or we just can't afford to take everybody at once because the brew had shut down. So that was actually a really cool opportunity. So I think it's well worth it for, anybody. Like if you're too far away, too small, can't leave your brewery, the remote selection process, I think is well worth the effort. Yeah, and then I can talk a little bit about Firestone. It's not so different from both of you guys. I think, we're a considerably larger brewery with pretty considerable contracts. We kind of run a program where we like to be between 90 and 100% contracted for the future year or the next year. So in this case, 2022. And then we like to tier our contracts down over time, mainly for the reason that certain new beers might not be brewed as much in future years. It's impossible to tell what's going to happen in the future. And certainly our brewery has gotten caught long. I remember back, again, you were talking about 07, 08, when things got so crazy. We were contracting 100+% for future years. And then when Union Jack Stales started to peak and then taper off, I got stuck with a lot of Cascades and Centennial and not a lot of people willing to take them. So I like a tiered approach with, and every brewery might be a little bit different, but maybe 80% in year 2, 60% in year 3, and diminishing down. So each year you can top up contracts. And that helps to, communicate to the growers the varieties that you're interested in, but then at the same time, allow you to top up and change up things, as your brewery kind of develops. And these days I feel like, we're on an innovation explosion in the industry. Everybody's coming out with so many new beers. It's hard to keep your contracts balanced. So, Yeah, and then we do the exact same thing you were talking about, Todd, where, you know, we send a couple teams out, maybe into the mid to 3/4 of the way through harvest to pick the early pick hops. You know, Simcoe comes in a little earlier, Cascade Centennial come in a little earlier, and then a late team, which is now going in next week to kind of clean up on things that are a little later pick, Eldorado, Mosaic. I'm sure I'm missing some of the other major hitters. Citro is somewhere in the middle there. And anyway, yeah, so we like to be there in person. And I feel like, you know, taking notes, good notes and logging that data is important. I always give that, you know, so you can go back and remember the farms that you picked in previous years, you know, get your grower number list going so you know what you're doing. But yeah, we like the same thing. Like we like to do it blind and then
Very
kind
blind.
of reveal at the end. And sure enough, quite often we're picking the same farms. So yeah.
That's a good point too. You kind of touched on it, and it is very, very, very critical to production brewing, but the contracts and how they tie into forecasts, production forecasts, that it's kind of the bane of everyone's existence. But I don't know how you can plan on how much of what brand you're going to make if you don't have a commitment from your wholesaler to sell a certain amount, because then you can secure the right raw materials. That doesn't always work out quite right. So
does it ever work out?
I don't think we're going to figure that out, but you gotta at least try, right?
Well, and that brings up an interesting question that I wasn't going to ask, but now that I think about it, and I think it might be the right time, is, you know, when you're building new beer recipes, are you focusing more and more over time as you know, kind of as wisdom settles in and you get stuck with some of these things? Are you focusing on hop blends more today than maybe single hop beers like you were maybe in years past? Either one of you can take that one, but
go ahead, Brian.
We're definitely looking at using different blends a little bit more than we were in the past, just based on, you know, when you have a beer that takes off one year and you want to plan for the next couple of years that beer doing really well, the way the market is, it doesn't always happen. And so we're definitely using more blends when it comes to that. But we also tier contracts. So we're 80, 90% and then about 50% and then, you know, down to about 25% for year 3, which helps us out because we got stuck as well. And, you know, I mean, I guess that was probably 2016. I think, being completely over contracted on many different varieties, and at that time it was like, okay, well, we'll just sell what we have because other people are going to want it. Well, then nobody wanted it, and so we were stuck with a lot of, you know, renegotiating things and all that stuff. And so we are trying to avoid that by having some common larger hop varieties we do use in a lot of different beers, while having kind of the star hops that we layer on top. That are some of the newer varieties that we don't do much longer term contracting on, and we try to stay a little bit more nimble when it comes to that. But when it comes to our flagships, we're pretty well contracted all the way through, because we've got a rough idea year after year of where we're going to be on those.
Yeah, Three Floyds, I think generally favors hop blends instead of just one single note. You know, I used to do more of that at Surly and at Rock Bottom, only because I wanted to learn as much as possible about brewing with that hop, you know, and just try to figure that one hop out without adding variables. But now it's very now I think as the suppliers have gotten in that blending game, on one hand I'm like, that's our job, let us brewers their hops. But on the other hand, it's I like the consistency aspect. It's less work for, you know, it sounds silly, but brewers make mistakes and they often don't notice it. And weighing out 3 or 4 different hop varieties for 4 brews back to back to back can get, you know, stuff gets missed or it's dirty, or, you know, it's nice to have one sealed bag that's that blend. So I like that aspect a lot. And I think it's interesting as we get more science to look at spider graphs too, and just look at, you know, you overlay a blend over the super trendy variety and like all the points are there pretty close, you know, but it's not that variety. So it's kind of interesting to see everyone chase the new hop when a lot of those things are in multiple different hops. You just got to blend them right. So not easy though.
No, and I mean, just strategy wise, coming from our brewery, you know, we do lean heavily on blends, and what we've become better at and are trying to work more on is at the pilot level. doing a lot of single hop trials to taste and familiarize ourselves with single varieties, but always working towards blends in anything that's going to be released at any appreciable volume, just knowing that blends gives us some downstream flexibility. But yeah, I know it's I think the consumer out there is starting to, almost like in wine varieties, start picking beers based on hop varieties. You know, I'm sure they're cluing in or keying in on Mosaic and Citra and some of these very now famous cultivars. So I think brewers have to kind of play between those lines a little bit as well.
Yeah, and from the smaller perspective as well, when it comes to blends and all that stuff, it kind of buffers off, not having so many different lots available and this and that. It kind of buffers us from getting stuck with one of our main hop varieties not performing that well. So it allows us a little bit more flexibility in recipe massage to try to make sure that the beer is what we ultimately want. And so having 3-4 different varieties in there allows that flexibility.
I think there's something to be said for blends being part of a house flavor too. A core one hop variety and a bunch of your IPAs kind of can set your lineup apart a little bit too, which is kind of fun. And then accent hops on top of that, which I think a lot of breweries are doing. I don't know for a fact, but I assume they are.
Yeah, if the crop report is any indication, Citra is a baseline hop for a lot of brewers out there. Just guessing based on the numbers. Mosaic would be in there too. But
yeah, that beer Extra Citra at Surly was literally, we have Extra Citra. What are we going to do with it? Let's make a beer. It's like a single hop session, but at the same time, we needed one in the lineup, but I mean, it was literally, we were over contracted too. So it's not, I think people think that hops are cheap. Everything gets more expensive. So, yeah.
Well, I guess, this is kind of a continuation of that original question, but, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, but I think it's important in each of your own words, like, what do you believe the role of the brewer is, whether you're a small brewer, medium, large, in supporting farmers and the hop industry at large? Like, what can we do for the betterment of the growing community, communication wise or other?
I'll go first. Yeah, I'll go first. It's especially after this last trip, I think we need to impress upon the business side of our breweries that forward contracting is important. Not only because it ensures that we get the hops we want to make the beers we want, but to support the farmers. And if there's not fair, equitable pricing on their end, they're screwed. So if you don't forward contract, they might not continue to put that hop variety in and might go away. So it's pretty clear that it needs to be kind of a balanced relationship. We need hops, they need to grow them, but they need to make X amount of money. So I think that's the biggest thing is then also the whole creative side of new varieties and feedback. And a lot of the suppliers now are taking a lot of notes and developing databases based on our selection notes, which is cool, but it's also kind of annoying when you're there. But it's also, they use it for good stuff, but unfortunately it kind of backfires. They will pre-select for you. They're like, well, we've seen these guys select this in the past. So then they present certain lots that might be that, which I'm not super stoked on. But I think the biggest thing is making sure hops continue to get grown. It sounds overly simple. It's not, because the sustainable pricing for the farmers is very important.
Yeah. Brian, anything to add to that?
Not so much, just that I completely agree. I mean, if the farmers don't have any idea what future demand is going to be for hop, if we're just buying it on the spot, they're less likely to continue to cultivate those varieties that we like. And then just overall, what our feedback on what we're finding in selection for your suppliers or your growers definitely helps a lot when it comes to just the nuances between different hops and what we prefer. And I don't know if our feedback is being put into that pool of stuff. You know, we get stuff from all over the place. Our contracting is small enough that I don't think they're, you know, cultivating, you know, different types of lots specifically for us to select. But, you know, I could definitely see that happening as well. It's kind of a self-fulfilling philosophy when everything just kind of moves in one direction, because that's what you overall have preferred over a time period. They kind of push it in that direction, and it's just everything gets pushed that way. So, you know, open, honest feedback is important.
Yeah, and I think you guys covered it, but I mean, just to make a clear point that, you know, if small brewers, large brewers, medium brewers, I mean, if you're seeing lesser expensive hops on the spot market, and that's leading you to stop contracting, you know, it's part of the cyclical problem, because when there's a glut of hops on the spot market, it means they weren't contracted for. And that's signaling to the farmer to pull some of that crop out and put something else in. So, you know, if the pendulum swings to where the industry is relying on a spot market, the communication lines have been snipped, and it could lead us the wrong direction. So, yeah, I think we made that point.
And just because they're cheap doesn't mean they're good. Just saying.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Exactly. I mean, it's, you know, at least for us, when we buy a lot of, you know, hops on the spot market, we tend to gravitate towards, you know, certain suppliers and certain breweries that have it, you know, ones that we know that they've gone through selection, and maybe they're offloading a little bit extra that they have from, you know, from contracts earlier. And so that, you know, that cuts out about 3/4 of the hops that are out there. And so, you know, we've gotten to know some of the larger breweries' kind of contracting habits and overall flavor profiles of some of their hop varieties as we kind of roll through. And so that helps us as on a secondary level, kind of picking up the scraps from some of the larger guys to kind of control where we get our flavor from in the hops. So,
well, and actually that's a perfect lead into the next question, because I was just going to ask, and you just gave one, pro tips for brewers not able to select on a regular basis, or feeling like they just can't afford to select. Are there any kind of just in-house, you know, aside from purchasing, aside from selection, just good housekeeping? What do you do? Do you have any programs when you bring hops into the breed to select them? Maybe, you know, do you qualify some for dry hopping? Do you qualify others for hot side? You know, any pro tips there? Maybe Brian, you can start.
Yeah, we definitely, you know, a lot of times we have certain batches of hops that we relegate towards just dry hopping, and we, you know, we smell them when they first come in, and kind of see we relegate certain things to dry hopping. Other lots we relegate towards, you know, just kettle hopping, hot side. Sometimes even just first or second editions as well, if they're not quite what they should be. And so we've moved away from any sort of contracting when it comes to a lot of the bitterness side of things, and we do kind of use that as our kind of kitchen sink to throw some of those varieties that come in from the spot market that maybe aren't up to par. But we've also got to really get at, you know, finding out who we really trust as a source for hops on the spot market. And we've, you know, in general, 70 to 80% of the time are pretty lucky when it comes to the hops that we buy on the spot market. So that's basically what we do.
Yeah, I think you can. I hope I don't get suppliers in trouble here, mad at me, but I think a lot of them will send you a sample, you know, like representative sample that pellets, obviously, that you can evaluate, which I would say if you can do it, do that. And then also, of course, it sounds stupid, but you just travel to Europe and you'll notice real quick that a lot of brewers don't keep their hops cold. If you can keep them in a freezer, do it. That's expensive, but also we don't try not to leave any bags for dry hopping or aroma varieties like around. Like once they're open, they get used. You don't use a half bag, but our brew volume is also big enough that we can kind of build that into the recipes. But if you do, there's a lot of small breweries that have figured out, you know, Cornelius kegs, you know, just purge it with CO2 and if it's a hop you're only gonna use once a month, put it in a Cornelius keg and purge it with CO2 or nitrogen, and at least keep them away from stalling oxygen. And I know a lot of small breweries do that and have to, because they only use 44 pounds in one batch, you know. So yeah, it's we use a lot of different hop products too, everything from bitter extract to aroma extract and the new stuff. I don't need to name names, but all the flowable stuff. We're interested in learning about everything and all of it. So we do kind of mess around with all that. And I think, honestly, I hope that's kind of the future, because it does get around some of those crazy energy intensive storage issues. Like for us to store our hops, we just spend a lot of money to keep a freezer cold. And, you know, if we have any given moment 24 to 40 pallets of hops on hand, that's a pretty big freezer. So, and then you also got to be ready to be able to take a delivery at any given moment, you know? So, it's kind of, yeah, it's, I like the idea of the downstream products, the flowable stuff, just because it seems like I talked to one of the scientist guys about it, and just the nature of these products, they can't absorb oxygen. It's pretty crazy. They're so viscous. So stuff like that, which is pretty fascinating to me, and what it could mean for hop aroma and beer, and reaching freshness levels of, you know, aroma freshness for hops, unattainable that I've ever, you know, tried with just pellets or whole leaf. So, yeah.
Great. No, that's all both great. You know, just from the Firestone perspective, yeah, we do the kind of annual harvest selection, which is whole leaf. And then once the pellets arrive to the brewery, we're always going into those individual lots, grinding pellets, whether we're using kind of those, you know, what would have been for cannabis, but use it for pellets, or a pestle and mortar. But you know, grinding up pellets, qualifying them either for dry hopping or pushing them over to the hot side. We'll even go so far as to mock up blends of those pellets in trying to work towards what maybe a new brand or new recipe might call for. And yeah, you talked about the Cornelius kegs. We have these containers that we purge with CO2, and we put our partial bags in and try to use those then first, right? Yeah, first in, first
Yeah, you
out.
know, one thing we've also done, we've gone as far with certain hop varieties that do tend to stale pretty quick, that we're pretty tight on contracts, that we'll actually massage our recipes just a little bit, so we only use whole bags. You know,
Yeah.
maybe recipe wise we'd use, you know, 42 pounds, but we're going to increase it up to 44 and kind of massage things a little bit to get recipes. So we're only using full bags on dry hop, and that minimizes the partial bag sitting in there, especially certain beers that we're only producing once every 2 weeks. You know, after a bag sits there for 2 weeks, even though we do, you know, purge and seal and all that stuff, any partial hot bag, you're still going to have impact on the aromatics, quite substantial.
Well, Matt,
actually.
you touched on it too, but just you know, looking at your hop pellets is probably a good idea regardless, because as we both know, or we all know, that that's a good spot for, even if you selected that lot, that there's a lot that could go wrong in a pelletizing run. You know, end of a row, or even just an operator or start and stop kind of stuff. So, you know, definitely, I mean, we look at our pellets also, but not like every week or anything. You know, once we have them, and once we know that this is a regular supply or lot of pellets, then we don't have to do it consistently. But it's definitely when we're ordering spot or when new stuff is coming in, we'll look at it that way. But I don't know, I always think it's a good idea for brewers to look at it every time they open a bag of hops. I mean, I don't know, that's just me, but isn't that kind of why we brew? Like, look at your raw materials and evaluate them before you put them in there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The old adage, crap in, crap out. If it doesn't smell good, it's not going to make good beer.
That's definitely true.
Well, you know, we've answered some of the key questions. I can't help but ask this question, and Todd, you already kind of started talking about innovations, but you know, at the brewer geek in me is always curious about what you're doing in your breweries new in regards to dry hopping. Obviously, IPA is still king. Hazy is in crazy demand, but I gotta believe like West Coast pendulum is swinging back.
I hope so.
You know, and after all these years of experience and all these years of making hoppy beers, I suppose we could fill many hours with talking about our trials and tribulations, but do you have one or two new things that you're doing in your breweries? New implement, new way to dry hop, new ideas, new enzymes, anything that you want to share with the group, kind of innovative in terms of use of hops, in particular dry hopping? Todd?
Yeah, we've spent a bunch. Luckily, Nick Floyd is obviously a brewer, but also super into trying new things, buying new equipment. So this new brew house we have is kind of set up to do a lot of those different things that I think, Matt, we first talked about at first Haas presentation that you had at your fest. That, how many years ago was that? I don't remember, but just the talk then was like, a colder whirlpool temperature kind of was kind of the buzz at the time. And so this new brew house we have now has a giant gel tube heat exchanger between the kettle and the whirlpool, and the automation we can set up for just about whatever temp between boiling and 160 degrees to hit our whirlpool hops. We also have a separate vessel. So the whirlpool hops go in it's almost like a cylinder sieve kind of thing, like a wrapped up water tub. So all the hops in there and we recirculate it. So not only does that help keep our yield up, because we don't have to worry about sucking that in the heat exchanger, it also allows us to recirculate it and really get contact time and ensure it. So problem is, I'm not sure that any of that stuff makes a difference. Yeah.
It's
cool.
fun though.
It's cool,
At least you're honest. At least you're
Yeah.
honest.
It's like we only use it on a couple of the beers because it's so different than our OG process. Can't do that. So as a result, one of the new beers uses it, and that's fine. I mean, we want some differentiation on process between, to make the beers a little different. But the Germans are convinced that it's, the engineering has to work, but we're just like, yeah. So we have a hop gun, which is it's almost like a giant emulsion mixer inside a vessel that we can purge and flood with DAW and push out, and then run beer in there and hops and whatever else, and mix it for X amount of time, and then put it back into the fermenter, and we can recirculate it if we want. We do that on one of the beers, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not honestly sure that it's quantifiably different because we haven't done both. It's hard to do that much volume and do this one's dry hop that way, this one's done that way, and then actually analyze it, So, but most of the core brands are still, we just pour the hops through the man way while we're purging the headspace with CO2. It's sometimes, yeah, keep it simple, stupid.
That is true.
Yeah.
Ryan, any new innovation stuff you're doing in your brewery?
We're constantly trying a lot of different stuff on our pilot brewery that's attached to our tap room. Dip hopping, lower whirlpool temperature. Definitely trying that out. Different, recirculations, timings, different dry hop temperatures. We're always kind of playing around with that. I'm kind of with Todd. It's kind of hard to quantify the differences. Sometimes it's fun to do it and just see if it, sucks or not. And if it doesn't, it's like, oh, let's try to improve on that and kind of go from there. Quite a few years back, probably 4 or 5 years back, we improved our dry hopping, more of a safety, more for like a safety reason, rather than going up to the top of our 120 barrel fermenters and dumping hops in and this and that. We got an Amco Rolec, like a DH90, and so we recirculate through. And the big thing that we noticed on that is we were able to obtain kind of the same hop aromatics and same overall characteristic in the beer with lower contact time and also drop our hopping rates just a little bit as well. It did enter a little bit of haze into our beers, which is totally fine. And then we added a centrifuge and some of them are hazy anyway, which back 10 years ago, that was the complete opposite of what I wanted. But now I don't really care as much because everybody wants hazies. Right. So we're always trying to innovate. We're looking at some of the new hop aromatic products in there for various different beers that we're looking at doing this next year. But having a small pilot brewery, we can do a 7-barrel batch and really kind of experiment with stuff quite a bit. And if it doesn't work out, who really cares? It's 7 barrels of beer. It's not that big of a deal. So, well, I was looking for something new.
Yeah. And I'll just throw in there, I think at Firestone Walker specifically, some of the newest research we've been doing, and we've always been playing with the timing of the dry hop, whether we need, yeast or active yeast, or if we should wait until we have lower yeast counts. And this will be an endless debate between brewers, and but we certainly can differentiate beers by when we do our dry hop. And I think the other one, and this is probably not typical for a larger brewer, but we've been playing a lot with just changing up yeast strains for new hop forward beers. And that leads me into one of the questions that came in. What's your favorite new trend surrounding hops? And I think we've kind of touched on some of this. For an example, cold IPAs, you mentioned dip hopping, etc. And, our brewery is starting to play with, lager yeast to make hop forward IPAs. We've done Kolsch yeast because I think there's some really wonderful beers out there that use those yeast. So I would say from our brewery's perspective, the newest thing is playing with different yeast strains and just seeing how it impacts hop character. You guys got anything else like that?
I'd agree.
Yeah, I mean, knowing the yeast strain you're using, I mean, you can, certain yeast strains definitely tend to remove a lot of bitterness from the overall beer. Certain lager strains, you can produce the exact same recipe with 2 different strains. You end up with 2 completely different beers, when it comes to the overall balance of, perceived bitterness and aromatics and all that. So, it's fun.
Yeah.
And I think I'll go ahead and say it, but biotransformation, I think it's real. It's hard on the brewer level to quantify it, I think, without more science coming in. I think it sounds like you guys in Yakima were pretty adamant about, like screaming at me literally that, no, it's real. So I think, I don't know if they're going to present somewhere or MBA or something, but I think it's coming. But it's it's not concrete. That's the thing. So yeah, you change yeast strain, you change hop variety, and it doesn't happen. And then you change yeast, but not the hop variety, and it happens. Or you change the day you dry hop, and it happens. So a lot of our guys have learned the hard way that possibly dry hopping during primary is a bad idea. So we're set up where we can do it under pressure safely. So which is great, but then it screws up your pitch. You can't harvest that yeast because it's full of hops. So it's in a production brewery, it's about all those things, obviously. I think you guys know that, but it's I wish it was as easy as what's the right yeast with the right hop variety, because it's not just that,
Well, then you bring water chemistry into it, and it throws all that out the window. So.
Full circle.
Yeah.
That's what keeps us all in the game, right? Is that you never figure it all out, and that's the beauty of it.
I hope we don't ever know it all.
Well, I'm going to go through, I think we're getting towards the end of the hour, just to make sure we cover the questions that come in. I'm going to try to continue forward here. So Carlos asks, and I don't know if I'm going to get this question perfect, but hello, brewer friends. You've been talking quite a bit about different quality perceptions within the same variety. We know that Amarillo is strictly analytically monitored towards certain attributes and that make the variety unique. Do you know if there are other varieties or products that have such a meticulous analysis program in order to reach the optimum picking time? I think that's probably in reference to VGH's GCMS work with Amarillo. I don't know if you guys have anything on that. That's kind of a tough question, I think.
Well, no, I think, Matt, you should answer it, but the answer is I think almost all of them do. I mean, from what I've seen, any variety, there's some growers that are pretty proud of their proprietary varieties and want every brewer to buy it, and they want to plant more of it. So yeah, a lot of it is, I know, through ICR and YCH, they have all their growers, they contract a lot of different growers, and they have very specific pick windows for for their varieties, that if those growers don't follow, they get in trouble or breach a contract. So I think it's there. It's kind of behind the scenes, but it's definitely a big part of what makes harvest such a shit show, especially this year. Wow. Yeah.
Well, yes, yeah, you make a really good point, because I was really impressed across the board. Pretty much all of the merchant vendors that we were dealing with had more analytical information available than I had seen previously, and more data collection. I think you talked about, to the point of like you're getting probed for information to be
Yeah, you
used.
feel like you're getting squeezed.
So maybe to answer the question, I think it's the bar has been raised across the board, and hopefully for the betterment of brewers. And that picking window point is really a good one. I think that's what this is all aiming at. When's the optimal time to pick these varieties to deliver more breweries that true to type, intensity that we're looking for, especially for dry hops.
And that doesn't necessarily mean they get those hops picked in that window. Turns out that's the things they don't tell you, because it doesn't always, it's insane. Like, I don't know how they can try to do what they're trying to do. But one thing I was going to mention about selection is, like, some of the new varieties that I was not a fan of, that we were shown years ago. The hop growers are not, these are suppliers, not growers. They're just super excited about these hops. They're not brewers generally, but they're like coconut and like savory. And I'm just like, to me, those are like, no, like I don't want those in my beer. I'm not making bouillon. I'm not making stew. And thank God most of those have drifted away and we're, back to, I don't know if you remember some of those, Matt, but I'm just like.
Well, Sabro came from some of that coconut stuff, in my opinion.
Yep.
But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
So another reason to go to selection, if you can afford it, is to have your voice in some of these new varieties that they're literally in baggies, Ziploc baggies, that's all they have, they're not even available to brew it. So, and at least it allows us to steer what we want in the future from hops. So I think that's important to note. Like, that's a big reason to go out there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This one should be an easy question to answer. How do you get rid of all this Cascade?
What year?
Good question. I mean, I think that's a great question. Just how do you move your excess hops? And I think there's a number of avenues, whether it's lupulin exchange or just calling around your brewer friends or trying to use them on the hot end of the process. Our brewery is, even like at our scale, able to send some of the older lots of pellets off to be extracted. Yep. So we can retain the brewing value and CO2 extract. Not everybody's going to have that ability, but that might be some place that some of these hops can go.
Yeah, it might cost you a little bit, but you're not out, and then you've got super stable stuff forever that you don't have to keep frozen. And if your brewers are on it, it really helps dial in hot side IBUs and stuff. We've done that, but also I always tell, like, make sure you just talk to your suppliers, like not when it's too late, not 6 months into the year you're long. Maybe 2 months before the end of the previous year, like, hey, we're looking like we're going to be long, because they can defer them or they might be able to move them. It's amazing. They've been very, very gracious to work with.
Yeah, I think it just goes full circle back to the communication piece. And, I think the earlier you speak up, the more likely you're going to be able to find someone, to buy those hops.
Yeah, I think open, honest communication with your suppliers is paramount when it comes to that, because you'd be surprised how flexible they are in, either reassigning or pushing stuff forward, deferring them, or being able to swap out some other varieties that they have available that you may be able to do. And then, us, we also blend them in with, some of our other beers. We use them for bittering, we use them for, various other things, and the pub uses them and all that stuff. But, we were pretty long on Cascade and, quite a few years back. And, we had like 4 years worth at one point in time, just because of, changing overall release schedule and all that stuff. So, that we went to the supplier and they helped us out.
Yeah, this year's Cascades were amazing. So hopefully you got too much of those, because it was a unique year, I thought, for them.
Falling back in love with Cascade.
Yep, and Centennial, yeah.
I do have some tenure, so that's good.
Good.
So here's another question, and we may have covered this, but do any of you send notes about current lots and potential future characteristics that you're looking for? I think this is sending out maybe to the merchants, or what are you trying to avoid? Or some useful tips and tricks for making your selection more efficient. Do you bring a current beer with you, or some type of hop steeping device such as a French or AeroPress? Any tricks that you bring along or information you send forward for selection?
I don't have any tricks. I'd like
I
to
don't either.
develop, yeah, I'd like to develop a kit that would allow us to do some things to whole leaf hops in real time in Yakima that, you know, force them to go through some of the process that they go through before they're in beer, to kind of simulate that, but do it fast, like in a lab kind of environment. But I haven't figured that out yet. But because there's a lot of,
Let us know when you do, Todd.
well, I'm not telling you. This is my. There's a lot of oxidative reactions, good and bad, that happen to all the hop compounds that some scientists are just scratching the surface. It's insane. The amount of, I mean, I don't know, even just a couple of years ago, they realized that they had not identified like most of the compounds in hops.
Yeah.
They're getting there now, but it's crazy. Like, just makes my head hurt.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're referring to is a lot of this thiol research, some of the very trace compounds that have massive impact in hop character and flavor for sure.
Like, it kind of blew my mind when I was told that, you know, not all oxidative reactions are bad. As a brewer, just like bad.
Whoa.
But I mean, I'm not talking barrel aged beer either. I'm talking fresh IPA, and apparently some hop terpenes turned into sesquiterpenes that are desirable, more desirable than the original terpene. My head exploded. I was like, well, how do we control that? So when we just go to Yakima, we just go to the basics, rub, know what we're gonna do, and don't add variables. You know, try not to, you know, do much beforehand. You know, like it might, like onion, you know, food and stuff. Like, try not to have our palates you know, over inundated with other strong flavors. COVID's been an interesting thing because a number of us have had it, breakthrough cases this summer, and it has affected our smell and taste. So like, it's kind of weird. But yeah, it's just stick to what we know when we go there and talk to the growers, but definitely give feedback. There's some brewers that we know really well that are very vocal about they do not want this specific variety picked early. They only want late picked, blah, blah, blah. And that's probably, they get it, but they have to really, really drive it and kind of manage it because it's not easy. I mean, it's asking a lot, I think. But some brewers can do it. I don't do that, but you can.
Okay, well, I'm going to keep plowing through these questions. Andrew from Heretic Brewing said it's hoppy beers. Is there any new style or some new fun technique related to hops that it's exciting or fun?
Nothing's
I've got an answer to that. So
go for it.
Well, it's funny. Now I've been back for a year, but I spent a year abroad doing some brewing and a lot of shadowing in Belgium. And it's when I started working on a pilot plant, my first couple of hoppy beers I produced were not received well. It just wasn't what either the brewers there or the marketing team were interested in. So it really forced me back into this almost older, restrained, but yet hoppy kind of vein. And in that particular case, I was using Belgian yeast, which is pretty expressive, and lower levels of dry hopping, but using newer tropical forward hops, such that to try to match and balance this expressive yeast, with a lot of isoamyl or banana character, with some tropical hops to create something that when you first taste or smelled it, it didn't just come across as an IPA, but added complexity and interesting. So, and I've always felt that with Pilsner beer. I think if you pick up a Pilsner beer and it's just obviously dry hopped, you probably dry hopped it too aggressively. I think a little bit of dry hop goes a long way in a Pilsner beer. So, to answer that question from my perspective, I think, just practicing some restrained late hopping in some of these classic styles can lead you to new and interesting beers and flavors. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that 100%. Just seems like most of the people looking for IPAs aren't, are looking for to be bludgeoned with hops,
It's so
no,
easy to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't know, nothing new, but I'm just, I'm excited to, just kind of look at the subtleties of flavor and try to get back, pendulum always swings back and forth. I've been trying to say it for years. I hope the pendulum swings back a little bit, so people are a little bit more deliberate in the raw materials they use in their beer, and deliberate on what they're throwing in it. Just don't throw it in because you think it should go in, that it's going to be, make some awesome, great big hazy IPA. Be deliberate in what you use, and concentrate on the subtleties. And luckily we have a pilot brew that we can do some pretty fun little subtle things, and we can do it over and over and over again. And it doesn't break the bank. And so,
I think
that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah, and I think what Matt touched on earlier, I think the future of hops is really yeast in a way, and their synergy and how they work together. We're just starting that, like some of the new yeast strains that Omega is working on, and we've done some trials with that stuff, and it changes everything. So that's more variables now, which is good.
Okay, let's see here. Next question. What are your experiences or opinions about dry hopping of low and non-alcoholic beers?
I don't have much experience. I mean, I've made low alcohol.
I don't either.
I mean, to me, it's all relative. If it's a low alcohol beer in a traditional manner, like a session beer, British style bitter or something, it's all kind of relative. I wouldn't dry hop with 4 pounds per barrel in that little beer, just like I wouldn't with a Pilsner. But I don't know if this question is referring to, alcohol removed from a beer or just produce low alcohol by fermentation, because they're very different. I think those new alcohol process that you can remove with distillate columns works great, and I think you can make really good hoppy beers with those things. I don't have one, so that's all I know about them.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with very low alcohol beer and dry hopping, but definitely aim on the low side when it comes to that. It's just my experience. There are a lot of things that bigger beers can cover up that come out when it comes to harshness, hopper and various other things with high amounts of dry hop in low alcohol beers. You need a good balance, a good base to hold up to large dry hop loads.
Surprised no one's brought up hop creep yet.
I was waiting for it.
Well, we haven't gotten to all the questions yet.
Okay.
So here's a good one, because both of you guys have centrifuges. What is the best way to use a centrifuge for heavily dry hopped beers or hazy IPAs? So tip for centrifuging heavily dry hop beers.
Well, for haze, it's got to start in the brew house. The centrifuge isn't going to, I mean, it can take your haze out, but we ran into issues where the wort was so good that we weren't having just our normal haze and the normal beers. For us, just performed way better. Oil was better and everything. So we were coming to the centrifuge. We're hitting the centrifuge below our turbidity spec on the inlet, so it's like, it's not coming in right. So it's not going to come out higher, So yeah, when I do it again, I will put in a buffer tank and just rip everything in that fermenter into a buffer tank, and then feed the centrifuge from that homogeneous mixture of dry hops, some yeast, and beer to get maximum yield out. Because I think there is something that happens as hops go through the centrifuge. I think there's almost like an extra surface area or stripping effect to get a little bit more hop flavor out of hop. I'm not talking hops that have been in your beer for weeks. I'm talking 3 to 5 days only. But yeah, it's hard to do when you can easily just not produce any beer out of the centrifuge if you send it in a slug, But if you mix that all the solids with and keep it mixed, and a buffer tank is kind of the way to do that. It's another thing to CIP. It's pain, but I think it could say yield wise and also flavor consistencies and keeping the solids back. Then the centrifuge can actually remove all the solids. You don't have some in the bright that the packaging team has to deal with, or I love centrifuges.
Yeah, I'd echo what Todd said. We tend to do some recircing of tanks prior to going through, and we do produce hazies. We do try to rip it through the centrifuge as fast as we can, and we tend not to, rip it through as cold as our other beers that we want nice and clear. But all the work is pre-centrifuge to get the beer be hazy. We've had some moderate success on it. We failed miserably a couple times. I remember one of the first hazies that we did that we ripped through. It looked great coming out of the centrifuge, but within 3-4 days, it was clearer than our Pilsner. Yeah. We were like, what the heck?
Damn.
So yeah, it's like, not only if we can make our Pilsner this clear, that'd be amazing. Right. So, it's those are those things that you just, you have to learn, but all the, I think a lot of the work goes in, prior to going through a centrifuge and just ripping it as fast as you can. And then packaging it pretty quick afterwards as well. You don't want it just sitting around for days, right. After that.
On the HB4i I put in at the new Floyd's plant, there's a bypass auto kind of thing on the front end of the centrifuge. So if you've got a crash tank and you want to not run the top through the centrifuge, you just hit the button and it just rips it.
Bypasses, yep.
So that's a good option too, especially if the fuge is cleaning it up too much. Because we'll try to run it like 300 barrels an hour through there, and everything's just ripping. But then we get so many solids through. So, yeah. It puts some pressure on the packaging team to try to not put that in cans.
Yeah, we've done a couple different experiments with bowl speed and all that stuff. We found that when you do have some slugs that come through with some slower bowl speed, sometimes you have a hard time. You can kind of pack your bowl with hops. You have a hard time getting proper ejections and all that stuff. So we now just run at full speed and just try to cram it through as fast as we can, and try to avoid dusty hazy beer on the other side.
I know one thing GA's always told me, less following a centrifuge, is that if you can afford it, go with the biggest bowl you can for solids, and you have less ejections, and then lower bowl speed. It's just gentler on the beer. But I don't know that has anything to do with haze or keeping haze in or out. So that's more about like loss and just less ejections and everything. So.
Well, that's pretty good. We got a few more. I don't know if we're going to get through all these questions. They're now coming in, so I'll keep moving. Just real quick, Brian, can you just circling back? Someone's asking, what exactly is hop dipping?
Oh yeah.
Exactly. It depends on who you talk to, really. But
Van.
Basically what we've done is just gone through and done a recirc on our hot liquor tank, or done some blending to bring the temp down. And then, dry hopped in the whirlpool on a much lower level and recirced and everything. That's what we've done up to this point. We're looking at possibility of doing some other things moving forward. Didn't work out that well for us. The beer was all right. We think it was basically just a lot of extra work for not a lot of gain, to be honest.
So the hop dipping, just so I understand, is the lowering of the whirlpool temperature prior to adding hops.
Yeah, and we dropped it down to about 180 prior to adding it in, and then did a recirc through there, let it whirlpool for a while, and then chilled from there.
Yeah. So the story I heard, this is fun. The telephone game's already happening with this process. So Van came back from MBAA, and somebody had done a poster. Somebody from Japan had done a poster on this, because apparently Japanese brewers get a lot of poor super OG hops. So somebody came up with a good idea to do a hot steep with hot wort or hot water pre-fermentation, and you leave the hops in there. So I did it with Jared at Fair State, but Van's done it a bunch. So basically the first brew, I think water was even used. So they would run, I think it's like 130 to 140 degree water. Just make a really thick slurry with your hops. The idea is to blow off the onion garlic let it sit while you're brewing, cool into that. You got to cool in cooler to get that mass drop down, and then yeast at the right temp and everything. So it's kind of this weird workaround for, I think, super oniony garlic hops that, we all have had to deal with in the past.
Mhm.
It seems like Yakima must figure that out. So I don't know. Yeah, I agree with Brian. It's a lot of work. It's fun. I like different process steps, and I think it also is good to make brewers do different things so they're not doing the same thing. Every beer should, I think, be a little different. Maybe they're paying more attention as a result. So, but yeah, it's a lot of work I'm not sure that we need to do it unless you've got hop aromas that you want to drive off. Matt, you've probably seen that poster. It's floating around. I couldn't find it online, but it was at one of the MBAs out your way. So.
Well, then I'll encourage people to seek that out because I don't know enough about it to really speak to it. All right, so next question. Given how much hops cost and can add cost to a batch of IPA, have you guys experimented with using less hop per barrel while still achieving that same IPA or true to type hop character?
I wish.
I mean, as the owner of a brewery, that's the ultimate goal, right? But sometimes you just need to use a lot of hops.
Well, I think what Matt said earlier was like stylistically, there's an appropriate amount of hops for certain beer, or all beers actually.
All beers, yeah.
So I guess I don't think there's any shortcuts, and we've tried a lot of this stuff, and it might be we've learned a lot. It might be better, or it might be different, or maybe we, like Brian mentioned with their hop doser thing they use. Maybe they can use a little bit less hops because they're increasing surface area, so they can get away with using less hops. We did that with Coffee Bender. We were able to use way less coffee because we were pulling the coffee out of solution with the centrifuge. So that saved us a ton of money on the coffee. But I don't know, with hops, it seems like the only way is to process it without as minimal oxygen and consume it as fast as possible. I mean, that's the only way the hops make it to your mouth, and your nose. There's no shortcuts. I wish there was. Matt probably knows them all.
No, same thing. I mean, I think we've tried, mixing, and you get a little more extraction, but maybe you pay the price in more vegetable character, or that pellety character. So it's always, there's always a plus and a minus, no doubt.
There's no silver bullet.
Yeah, we'll cover a couple more questions. What do you think about thiol boosting products that are coming out on the market now? Does anybody have any experience?
Nerd alert. Yeah, I don't know. Matt, go ahead on that one.
Oh, I don't know exactly what John, who asked the question, is referring to, but yeah, there's some thiol boosting. There's also some enzymatic enzyme products that also help release and boost thiols. We alluded to it a little bit earlier. I mean, there's a lot of science pointing towards higher thiols being important, especially in these tropical hop forward beers. Some of that research is tied to research that's been done with Sauv Blanc wine, both in France and in New Zealand. So there are kind of analytical methods now with GCMS to measure these things. And I think, yeah, you said nerd alert, but I think, science is really focused on that right now, hop chemistry, cannabis chemistry, looking at thiols. So I think we're going to learn a lot more. I don't know all the answers, but I love high thiol forward hops, like New Zealand hops, like Blanc from Germany, and a lot of the US cultivars are really high in thiols. And I feel like, things are trending in that direction, and we're learning more.
Yeah, and we're just starting to learn it. So I don't know that we do anything actively on purpose related to anything with thiols at the moment, just because it's so new, and all of our brands that we're supporting are, go back a ways. We don't want to mess with those too much. So with new varieties, I think it will definitely be something we mess around with. We just got a pilot system running this summer, so we'll be able to do more stuff. We just don't have a pub to sell them now, so.
Well, here's a good one for you. I don't know if it'll come with a concrete answer, but in your opinion, what process creates the best haze stability? And I assume that means haze, not clear. Is it yeast, dry hop, biotransformation, proteins, mash pH, magic combination of all the above?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I'd say like Ron Ryan told me, it's the perfect storm, you know. It's hazy when you don't want it to be, and it's not hazy when you want it to be. And you got to start in the brew house and look at your wort composition with what's going on with malt and protein levels and your lautering, even just lautering. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's like you almost have to dumb down some of these high-tech new brew houses. Like the wort quality is insane, and they don't make great hazy beers. So we've had to add, supplemental wheat or grains that have high protein levels just to get it. But it's not permanent haze; it drops out. Gravity always wins. So I was pouring our hazy at the beer fest last weekend, and I put them all in the tray upside down, just to force people to flip it up so that when we did open it, it was least distributed. So yeah, I don't, yeah. No, I don't, yeah, I don't, this is not, I don't know. We don't brew a lot of hazies because I don't know, we're kind of not all for them. But we do make a couple. It seems like small batches will be hazy, and then whenever we scale them up, they're not. I don't know. Fermenter geometry, I think it's got to play a part.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff we can't necessarily control just to dial that haze in. So, Matt,
I mean, a lot of what we look at is, basically everything that we were trained as brewers, back in the late 90s, early 2000s, try to do the complete opposite.
Yeah.
It's, you don't want good wort clarity. You want to use tons of different grains. It's just, it's so foreign, and I've grown to appreciate it. I was pretty resistant to it at the beginning, until all of our staff started calling me the old guy that, didn't want to create, new styles and this and that. But that's the way it is. So basically just kind of throw out what we've learned and, try to make a beer that is just hazy.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that our brewery, in order to get mind haze into the market, to look, taste, and have the texture that the other hazy beers in our market had, we had to switch yeast. So for us, we had to move to one of these London 3 derivatives, AO38, I guess is the yeast that we use. And that was the magic thing that allowed us to create the haze. But there's
plenty of that body to it that really goes through.
Okay, last question, and then this will be the wrap-up question, and you can't go into great detail. It's the $1 million question here. Sorry. No. Oh, okay. Favorite hop combination. I would say 3 or less hops. Don't get too crazy. No right or wrong answer. Todd, what's your favorite hop combination? If you're blending hops, you can only drink one blend on the desert island.
Old school after this hop harvest, Centennial and Cascade.
Damn, nice. All right, Brian.
Simcoe Amarillo Centennial.
Nice.
That's a good one.
Yep.
My new favorite is Cashmere Azaka.
Nice.
All right.
Fancy pants.
Well, so at this point, everybody, we had amazing attendance. I mean, we've been over 100. I think we peaked out at somewhere 130, 140 people. Oh. So I just want to thank everybody who joined us, and a round of applause, virtual applause for Brian and Todd, our participants here. Thank you so much, you guys, for all your wisdom and time. Gretchen, do you want to wind this up?
Absolutely. Just other than to thank all of you, during this, I was just curious with each other's breweries, and to give you guys a little brewery spotlight here. Shout outs to your favorite, my favorite brewers from all of your breweries, but also just each other. Like, what are you admiring most? We've got a couple minutes left, if you want to hang on the line, and just end on some little brewery promotion, if you will. bent paddle, obviously bent hop, and I'm really interested in that peach cobbler one.
Peach cobbler. Oh
Yes,
yeah.
that's fascinating flavor profile. I've never seen that. I haven't tried that before. So pretty cool. And I'm a hazy IPA gal myself. I know I'm in good company here. So Gumball Head and Barbarian Haze, those are the Gumball Head's always a classic, good one. But really, from Firestone, you've got that the Mind Haze series. I haven't tried yet, but really excited. Looks like a very popular series, doing well.
Yeah, when are you guys gonna roll into Minnesota, Matt?
It's funny. We are there. You just
You
haven't
are?
found our beer yet.
Oh, I haven't been home, so I don't know, but I just assumed you guys weren't there yet. Wow.
Yeah, we've been there for a couple years now.
So this is a perfect
I
reason
don't
why we
know,
want to
Matt.
bring this up, Matt, and as a public service announcement, as thank you
Yeah,
for
there you
doing this today for us. Please, to all of our participants today tuning in, go out. Matt needs you to buy some of his hazy IPAs, the Mind Haze series, and go to your local favorite beer store and buy some today. And obviously, Bent Paddle and Three Floyds, go get yourself some of those too. To thank these gentlemen for their time and insights that they've all contributed today. Really appreciate it. You guys it's fascinating. I mean, you can tell by the amount of engagement. We had so many questions unanswered, tons of people to the 140 plus people who registered and attended. We just want to thank you. Clearly there's a demand and an interest for these kinds of dialogue and discussions, and they learned so much. We all did.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and so I think that is a wrap. From all of us at BSG, happy brewing, and cheers to all of you this Oktoberfest season.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
guys.
much.
Good to see you guys. Cheers.
All right.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.
Adios.
Bye.